You can now hear Movie Heaven, Movie Hell on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. Listen anytime, anywhere. Stitcher is an award-winning free app that lets you listen to all your favourite shows, plus discover from 20,000 news, entertainment and sports shows. You can also create your own custom playlists. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad and in over 4 million car dashboards. It's on demand and it's on the go. No downloading, no syncing, no wasted memory. You can stream your favourite podcasts from Stitcher. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And please leave us a review and rating on Stitcher. Thank you. Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aitken, and
I'm Keith Eyles, and we are both independent filmmakers who enjoy discussing movies, TV series, and related media. And for this special episode, we're pleased to welcome a guest. We have fellow filmmaker William McLaughlan. So welcome to the podcast, William.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's nice to speak to you both.
Yeah, well, you've worked with Simon in the past, I believe.
Yep,
Is that right?
Simon gave me my break in the movie industry, and I worked as a runner on his prologue section of Blood and Roses, which was
awesome.
Gave me my start in the industry. So thank you, Simon.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I know you, Keith, through our mutual friend Claire Bueno, who I listened to in the podcast recently.
Ah, that's right. Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, for the benefit of the rest of the world that might be listening, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, William, and what you're interested in?
Well, like probably everybody listening to this podcast, I'm interested in movies, both as a viewer and as a creator. And I suppose my background has been independent filmmaking like yourselves. I worked as a sound recordist for about 5 years. And then I took a break from that. And now I happen to be working on a movie in the locations department. I'm working on Outlaw King, which is shooting in Scotland just now, starring Chris Pine as Robert the Bruce and directed by David Mackenzie. So that's been an absolute belter of a project. I've got a little bit of time off. At the moment, we've got the wrap party tonight. And then I don't know what the future's bringing. Probably going to be working on a little mini documentary thing that I've been doing for a while. So that's my plan for December.
Oh, well, fantastic. So, okay, well, I mean, the reason we set up this meeting or this podcast was based on, I guess I met you back in February at the Fright Fest Glasgow. We met up there, and I remember that we had quite a long conversation regarding the DC universe, and the various movies and properties that fall under that. And obviously, myself and Simon on previous podcasts, we've touched on the Marvel Cinematic Universe a little bit here and there, and we've obviously looked into the X-Men movies. We've had quite a in-depth podcast on that one with Graham Williams. But we haven't really talked much about the DC universe, so thought that this might be a really interesting opportunity to do that. The other thing we thought was quite interesting is most of the guests that Simon and I have had on in the past are sort of within our generation. We're kind of like Generation X, I guess. We were born in the 70s, and we grew up sort of watching movies and TV shows through the 80s, and most of our guests have been sort of around that, either a few years older, a few years younger, or whatever. But you're actually a little bit younger than Simon and I, and we thought, well, that could also be interesting to get a millennials point of view.
I'll do my best for my generation.
Of
No
course,
pressure.
we're totally jealous of you, really, for being younger. But there you go.
When Keith and I, when we met, I think that you were, one of the things that you were enjoying about what I was saying was basically anything that was coming out of my mouth, you were saying, I've got to tell Simon about this because you'll be completely involved. So, yeah, that goes, Simon.
Well, I do think that this could make for quite a interesting discussion, in so much as I think you and Simon might have very different opinions on some of this stuff, whereas I'm probably going to be the fence sitter to a certain extent. But hey, that makes for a good podcast, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, DC Universe, DC and Warner, they've kind of gone a slightly different route to what Disney, Marvel have done. In so much as obviously the X-Men is its own thing because of ownership by studios. So you know the X-Men franchise is kind of the Donna Singer Kinsberg area, and they've got 10 films and a couple of TV shows on the go at the moment. But then with the MCU, we're up to I think 17 films now, and then there's 6 like streaming series and 2 network TV series. But that all falls under one single continuity. All the shows and the characters are connected, and they fall under this sort of one universe. Whereas DC seem to have gone with 3 strands to their universe. So you've got obviously the DC TV universe, which is the sort of Greg Berlanti, Mark Guggenheim shows, of which I think there's about 4 TV shows and an animated show at the moment that sort of fall under that continuity.
I believe it's, and then they refer to it as the CW.
The CW, yes, the Arrow. It's the Arrowverse, isn't it?
Yeah,
actually, the CW network has that one, and then you've got the original DC animated films, which I think is sort of the Bruce Timm films that sort of come out. They sort of go direct to video or streaming. 1 or 2 of those every year, and then of course you've got the DC extended universe, which we're up to 5 films with now, with obviously Justice League being the latest one, and it seems that sort of Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan seem to be the sort of execs in charge of that. So it's strange how they've taken a slightly different path to Marvel, even though they seem to have copied quite a bit of what Marvel are trying to do as well.
I mean, I think with any kind of business, you either go down the same route as your competitors or you have to do something different. I think it's probably not a bad idea to compartmentalize it, because if one thing is a miss with fans, there's other avenues that you can still go and have consistency, perhaps. So it's not necessarily a bad idea, and also it allows them the potential in the future to combine everything if they want to. Something that often happens in comics is parallel universes kind of merge and stuff like that. So there's potential to kind of do different things with it.
Yeah, it's this whole concept of the multiverse, which
the staple
which they've embraced big time. So yeah, okay. Well, I mean, tell us a little bit then, as you're the guest, and I've already done a lot of talking. Tell us a little bit about your relationship, I guess, to comic books in general, and then more specifically how you feel about DC and Marvel, etc.
Sure. So I don't know how long it was ago, about 6 or 7 years, I think. There was a thing that ran in Glasgow called Batman Live. Very similar to the Marvel Live thing that happened recently, I think, in the last year. Basically a stage play. And I had a friend that I used to work with who had an extra ticket. And I'd read comics as a child, but not so much as an adult. Maybe things like Watchmen and Mouse and stuff, and sort of critically acclaimed graphic novels. But when I went to see Batman Live, I was absolutely blown away. It was such a brilliant production. sort of acrobatics and circus tricks and stunts and theatrical kind of stage play stuff. Really impressive. And I bought some Batman comics, and I, for whatever reason, just got sucked hook, line and sinker into reading comics again and being a filmmaker and doing my own writing. I think a lot of the writing in comics is far less kind of micromanaged than it can be in film. And I think you get a really clear writer's voice coming through, or you can get a really clear voice coming through in comics. And it's a visual sort of narrative storytelling medium as well. So there's all these things there that I'm interested in and I like. So I'm predominantly, I would say I'm a DC reader, but I also read various Marvel comics as well, and other companies like Dark Horse, Boom Studios, IDW and stuff as well. So after I saw Batman Live and I started reading comics, I saw Man of Steel with a friend, and it was just one of those times where you go to the cinema and see what's out, and that was out. And I liked it. I thought it was a different take on the character, a post-Nolan kind of world. They obviously took the character in that sort of more hyper-real kind of direction. What if Superman existed here? And I really liked it. And then Batman versus Superman came out. I enjoyed that at the cinema, though I think it was shambolic, but I liked the scope and the sort of seriousness of it. A really good counterpoint to Marvel, who've got a much more sort of light-hearted, jocular kind of comic booky, take on it. This was much more the weight of the world, high stakes kind of stuff. And then with Batman versus Superman Ultimate Edition, I love that film. Hands down, my favorite comic book movie. I really like it. And then recently going to see Justice League, I've kept this under wraps from you because I didn't want to kind of color your thoughts on what this would be. I think you maybe got me on because I would defend this sort of stuff, but I hated Justice League. 1 out of 5, just probably the worst cinema experience for a film I've been anticipating that I've ever had. Just thought it was a total shambles, really messy. I can't imagine Zack Snyder, Joss Whedon are particularly happy having their names attached to this. And I don't know, as a sort of blockbuster, does it work? Yeah, it'll take your mind off your day for 2 hours, but as any kind of thought or meaning in it, not at all. So that's
very interesting. Okay. All right, Simon, do you have any thoughts or comments you want to add at this point?
Well, let me sort of tell you my history. It's kind of similar to William's, that when I grew up as a kid, I read comic books, but I didn't read them in a massive way. But I grew up with the 60s Batman show, the repeats on TV. So Adam West and so we always had, Batman was kind of a big part of my growing up, as well as the Batman comics. I was never really that much into Superman or Marvel. But then when I was in my early 20s, I got the comic book bug. This was in the 90s, and this was around the time of Nightfall and Death of Superman. And these were big comic book events, and this was when you not only were you trying to get every issue, but you were trying to get every cover as well. This is when you get the introduction of, there being like 4 different covers for the same comic book, and you had to get them all, and you had to get that one special one and all that kind of stuff. I actually had a copy of The Funeral of Superman, and there was like a special edition where it was it came in plastic, and it was like it was a white cover. There wasn't anything on there, and at the time people were fighting over these things, but years down the line isn't worth a lie. It's amazing how much money we spent on comic books back in the 90s, and how they're not worth anything. I mean, I would also read comic books like Spawn, and I was a big Star Wars collector, and I read the Alien comics and all this stuff. I mean, it was such it just opens your eyes to the bigger scope of of films. These comic books that extend stories and go off in different directions and come up with these new concepts, and in ways that filmmakers at the time couldn't do. I mean, we're talking about a pre-CGI world. And so I love the Christopher Nolan Batman films. I absolutely adored them, including Dark Knight Rises. I actually really enjoy that film, and I will defend it to my death because people had a lot to say badly about it, but for me, it sort of completed the trilogy, and it's kind of opened the door for a new trilogy at the end, or a new series, but they decided that's where they were going to end it. And then, of course, Christopher Nolan's, helping to make a new Superman film. Of course, I was going to be excited. I actually went to the Odeon Leicester Square with Clive Ashington, a guest of ours, to go and see it. And I came out of it and I was like, God, that was awful. Now, I was kind of enjoying the sort of more angsty side of it. This is somebody trying to discover who Superman is without having to go to the Fortress of Solitude and be tutored by his father for many years. He has no guidance, really. And I was enjoying that bit, but when General Zod turned up and it just became a massive CGI punch fest, I really lost all care for it. And also the ending pissed me off. The amount of destruction that happened to Metropolis, and Superman at the end is never worried about all these people who die in this catastrophe, but when it comes down to a family of good-looking people, he's going to break somebody's neck. That's not Superman to me.
I don't know. I quite like that kind of Superman. I think it's one of those things where they absolutely replicated, I think, perfectly the kind of destruction that was going on that happens in a comic book, and transferred that into the film. I remember watching it myself and being shocked at just the length that they were going to show how much stuff was being destroyed and so on. And I would argue that it's done in a much, much worse way in Justice League, where that threat that Steppenwolf presents, it's so insignificant, the stakes are so low, it really needed something like the approach taken in both the previous films, where there's this huge military intervention and the fate of the world rests in the hands of the main characters. And in Justice League, I was almost watching somebody play a computer game where I thought, I can do better than that.
Well, that's how I felt watching Man of Steel. It did. The fight scenes between Superman and the other Kryptonians felt like a video game, and what they did to Smallville, they absolutely wrecked that place. Absolutely wrecked the place. And the thing is, having I remember the Death of Superman comics, and the amount of destruction that took place in it, and the amount of times that Superman did everything in his power to move that fight away or try and protect people. And in Man of Steel, he didn't seem to care.
I think they maybe did need a few more little bits of him saving people. I appreciate that. I think
possibly. I mean, take Superman 2, when we have the original fight between Zod and Superman. Superman tries to take it away, and it's Zod who decides to use their powers against the people because they realize that Superman cares.
It's his weakness.
Yes. And the thing is, in Man of Steel, he has no weakness. He doesn't really, and it doesn't come across as somebody who's trying to learn to be Superman either. I've heard that argument. Oh well, he's not Superman yet, but he is.
I don't know.
But you don't see him sort of learning to be Superman, or any of his actions, affect him in any way, really.
I think there was enough of the sort of proto Superman learning to be Superman for me in that movie. It did feel like it was, the golden age sort of early version of the character, rather than what we've got in the comics now, which is a super developed very complex, not just in terms of his character, but in the way that the company write Superman at the moment. I'm not current with the Superman Rebirth books just now, but I understand there's currently been 2 versions of Clark Kent and things like that, which is typical for comics. The other thing that I really liked about Man of Steel was its treatment of Lois Lane, who I believe should be an inspiration to Superman and be kind of one of the people who sets the precedent for this is how you should conduct yourself. And the fact that they had Amy Adams at the end of Man of Steel setting up, Clark to be one of the Planet reporters, I thought was brilliant, really, really good, a nice modern twist on it. And I think the Donner Superman films are awesome. I watched them as a child a lot. I think that you can't do that now. I think one of the things that I really like about the Snyder take on Superman is, if Superman existed, how would he operate in our world? Now, I think that they don't actually even go far enough in the Zack Snyder films, because I think he'd be in Area 51 with his brain open being vivisected. We would be trying to get technology to kill each other with. So how would Superman deal with all the political, geopolitical fallout of things like Trump and Brexit and Putin? How would he deal with the situation in Syria? Would he be able to save those people? No, I don't think he would. There's no solution to these kinds of problems that are that simple. So I like the updated take. I do appreciate that some people really dislike that and they want a more escapist kind of version.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I've watched Batman v Superman recently, and I've only watched the theatrical cut, so if there's more of this in there, I don't know. But they kind of try to address that in that film. They try to, what is Superman in the real world? What is he to us? Should he be ruled? What should be the boundaries? All that kind of stuff. But then they drop it. They absolutely drop it. And, and I mean, going into why I didn't enjoy that film was the fact that you had 2 characters with opposing points of view, Superman and Batman. Batman saw Superman as a threat, and that's set up very early. And, it's they're 2 different points of view of how, I don't know, how they should treat, villainy in some sense. Batman's very, gung-ho. He doesn't care about, what happens to the villains after he captures them. I mean, this whole branding thing. And so you've got these 2 opposite points of view, and you can see why these 2 would clash. But then to make it out that actually it was a ploy by Lex Luthor for these 2 to fight, and the way he gets them to do it is so controversial, so so long, so really it all depends if all these certain bits fall into place. I mean, it's funny. I heard this line on a TV show, and they said it was about an FBI agent trying to unsolve a sort of conspiracy that's going on, and she says, we have to be lucky once. They have to be lucky all the time. And that sums up Lex Luthor's plan. He has to be lucky all the time.
Well, I think the thing that I would highlight as well is that the studio totally damaged the film by cutting half an hour out of it. So when you watch the theatrical cut, I feel like, I enjoyed it, but I could tell it was a seriously compromised film that I was watching, and they've taken out 1/6 of the film prior to the film being released. That's 1/6 of the final cut, and I think you miss so much that's important. And it isn't just big chunks that they're taking out; it's all these little extra bits in the scenes that make the whole thing kind of hang together. And I think what I love so much about that film is it feels the most like reading a comic to me. It is things like Luthor's plan coming off perfectly. And the first few times I watched the theatrical cut, I just didn't get enough information about what was happening there to kind of see how it worked. Whereas in the director's cut, definitely more information makes it clearer what's going on. And Luthor is lucky. But he's also, in the comics, there's this thing about the smartest person in the DC Comics universe, and it's either Batman or Lex Luthor, but they've never come out directly and said who's the smarter, but they're both meant to be the kind of genius level intellects that operate. I think you get a little bit more of Batman trying to detect and figure out, is he being manipulated while he's in this sort of blind road. I think it was more sophisticated and just more effective. And definitely, Simon, if you can be bothered and tolerate do it again, I'd say a bit like Kingdom of Heaven, if you've had the misfortune to watch the theatrical cut of that, the director's cut turns it, from a mediocre film or a film that's failing into one that's really effective and works if you're going to go with it.
Well, I mean, I agree with you on Kingdom of Heaven. I mean, the director's cut is far superior to the theatrical cut, but then I did quite enjoy the theatrical cut when I saw it at the cinema. So that's me. But I can understand what you're saying, but I think the main problem was they were trying to have their cake and eat it. The thing is, they were trying to do The Dark Knight, as in Batman v Superman, plus the death of Superman. And
the Dawn of Justice aspect as well of bringing the League together.
A very lazy way of doing it is this whole EPK pack that Wonder Woman watches. But most of the fact is where that comes. Because that comes in the middle of the setup to the fight. It's, it really takes the tension out of the whole thing when suddenly, they're building up to, Batman's put the bat signal out and Superman is being forced to fight, and then suddenly it cuts to Wonder Woman watching these little videos. And you're like, what?
Yeah. I believe that scene is in a different place in the director's cut.
Oh,
I
okay.
believe a lot of Luthor stuff happens in a different order in the director's cut as well, but it's been years since I've seen the theatrical version, so I can't remember directly, but that's all altered. I would say, as an aside, it's my least favourite part of comic book movies as a genre is the setup for future films. When I buy a ticket for a film, I want a self-contained film. That's fine if it's in a series. That's awesome. I like James Bond. I like Harry Potter. I don't want to see adverts like that in the middle of the film. It's the same with the post-credit scenes. I hate them. Having worked in a cinema, I want the audience out as soon as the director's name comes up, and sit there and wait for this advert for the next film. It's so cynical and so business-minded. I really hate that. And it's not TV films, that's the whole genre at the moment. I really don't like it.
It's also to do with the streaming model as well, because the filmmakers and the studios get paid per minute, and so if they can get people to stay and watch the whole of the film, it's more money in the bank. So it's sort of coming from that. But yeah, I agree with you. Marvel very much when they've done this in the past, Avengers 2, Age of Ultron, was very guilty of that, and it's kind of ruined what could have been a great film. There's all this setting up for other adventures in there, and it was kind of distracting. We didn't need Thor to go off to a mystical cave so he can have a vision. It was like, maybe that could be the beginning of another film, but that was just, But it's a weird thing, because we always compare Marvel and DC, and especially when it comes to the film. So, the same year as Batman v Superman comes out, we have Captain America Civil War, which, funny enough, is exactly the same story. It's two superheroes with opposing views who in the end have to fight each other. And it is done so much better, because you get to understand what those views are. On Captain America's point of view, he's trying to protect his friend, but in Iron Man's view, he sees him as a threat and somebody who should be taken down. And also, it deals with the fact of, their actions in the real world. So they're under a committee now. They have to, get their orders from the government because of the effects that they've had. And it was a great use of Age of Ultron, the fact that all these people had died in this, this town, in this country. And, the aftermath of that was that it wasn't a case of, well, they've flown off now and there's no repercussions from that. They're off on another adventure now. Doesn't care. The events that happened in that film directly affected the characters in the next film. And as much as Batman v Superman tried to do that, it just sort of missed the ball.
So for me, it's almost the opposite. I feel like Civil War didn't quite get there for me. And I, in some ways, I have the same problem with both films, which is Batman v Superman. I would have liked a lot more Batman v Superman and a lot more focus on that. I think the film's at its best when the intensity of that conflict comes together. And I had the same problem with Captain America Civil War. I don't feel like the two characters quite went at each other enough. And there's that bit at the end where I think it's Captain America's going to possibly, kill Tony Stark with his shield, and I just didn't ever believe it would go to that. I didn't get that. Also, the issue my partner Tabby had with the film, which she was very unhappy with, is she loves Captain America and she hates Iron Man. And to have this film be pushed as Captain America 3, she was very disenfranchised with that. I don't know. My favourite of the Marvel films are Ant-Man, which I think is brilliant, and The Winter Soldier, which I also think is brilliant. And I think these films are ones that I like because I think the filmmakers involved were on the same side as the studio, and their vision was it was much clearer and supported than something like Civil War, which is one of these films that I feel it's a bit too studio. It's a bit pushing the brand, and maybe, I also appreciate as well, as a 33-year-old man with no family, I am not necessarily the person that these kind of films are appealing to. So there's that as well. I'm looking at them maybe with a more objective viewpoint from a filmmakery point of view. Than maybe if I was younger or if I had children, I might be much more invested into it.
You're only just a millennial then.
Yeah, I'm offended.
You're only just scraping in there. Bloody hell! There's.
I can see where you're coming from on Civil War. The studio kind of pushed it, especially the advertising. Are you Team Cap or are you Team Iron Man? But I don't think the filmmakers were very much. I don't think it was like that when it came to the actual film. I think there was actual solid reasons for why this divide happened, and it all came down to Captain America's friendship with Bucky. If it wasn't for that, I don't think it would have been a hard stretch to believe that Captain America would have turned on the others to protect this guy.
That's I think why I wanted more Tony versus Steve. I wanted that relationship to be much more prominent in the film, and I think I would have enjoyed it more, like I might have enjoyed Batman versus Superman even more if it had been more Batman and Superman and more Tony and Steve. I think that core conflict, it's so crucial to any story, and you, at your peril as filmmakers, bring in Wonder Woman and have Crossbones having the opening scene and stuff like that. The more you dilute the core concept of the story, the less powerful those moments actually can be, I think. Yeah,
but I mean, that was the inciting incident. That was what made the government step in and stuff like that. Also, I mean, your point about Superman sort of, needing to be a lot grittier. I mean, take how they've done Captain America. They've just, presented him as a Boy Scout as he, should be, and it's worked really well. So I think Superman could have played as Superman without it having to be gritty and moody and, I worry about my place in the world and, all the sort of Jesus Christ allergies as well. A lot of Jesus Christ allergies in there. But I think that the thing about Superman is that he is supposed to be a representation of the best of us. He does, he's a selfless person. I mean, in the Death of Superman, he dies trying to protect the people from this threat who just won't give up, and he doesn't give up either, to the point that to defeat him he has to die. And it isn't from like a spike in the chest, it's the fact that these two have been fighting each other for so long, you know, that it is literally comes down to, you know, it's like the battle royale of it, you know, of the century, to the point that they just punch each other to death.
And that panel in the comic is brilliant. Just when you're describing it, I'm imagining all the windows exploding and stuff. I mean, I think, you know, it's interesting that they did go down this hyper realistic route, or trying to put these heroes into a world that looks like our world initially at the start, with the DCEU stuff. Because in the comics, everybody will be listening to this thinking about Metropolis and Gotham and all these Central City and so on. All these cities in DC are fictional, whereas in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and in the comics, it's often that they're in New York and that they're in Earth cities. And I think actually what's happened with the films is that it's almost like they've switched, where in something like Civil War, you know, they're in, you know, cities that actually exist on Earth for the most part. And then in, you know, the DC stuff, they're in, you know, cities that don't exist at all. But they've done it in a way where, I don't know, it seems like, to me, the DC stuff was meant to be more like our Earth, and the Marvel stuff, you know, by the kind of style that they're doing it in, it's not an Earth that I recognise. It's a comic book analogy of it. And I don't think one is better or worse. It's almost like they've just switched their own style from the comics, where Marvel have had a, you know, based in reality for their heroes to be operating in, and DC's completely mythical. Seems like the DC stuff is trying to be as close to our reality as possible, whereas the Marvel films are much more fantastic with their presentation of the world that this all exists in.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely with the new films. They're definitely the DC ones trying to set them in our world to the point where they have the, you know, the headline with the death of Superman, but also the fact that Bowie and Prince went in the same year, which you know, is well trying to insert into where we are now. And like you said, that was always the sort of thing that differentiated the Marvel and the DC universe, was the fact that Marvel takes place very much in cities and in places that are real to us, whereas in the DC world, all the places are fictional as well. And it's sort of weird that you know, everything's taken a slight shift because of almost because of what Nolan did with his Batman trilogy. Is you know, he made everything very much fit into the real world and make sense. And you know, now that they have gone sort of much more fantastical. And oh, by the way, thanks for your shout out to the Batman live. I actually went and saw it as well, much to the disgust, I think, of my then girlfriend, who came with me and wasn't as impressed.
Did she didn't like it? Oh.
No, not really. No. Whereas I got a kick out of it. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the points that you guys have made that's interesting as well is the fact that you know, sometimes the studio does almost get in the way of the storytelling. And I think with one of the problems, if you want to call it that, with what Warner have done with this DCEU is, you know, and I know they've been criticized for this sort of publicly quite a bit, is the fact that it's almost as if they tried to play catch up with what Marvel were doing. So where Marvel had taken these different phases of films and you know, sort of time to set things up with individual character stories before having their team up Avengers Assemble movie, you know, Warner tried to skip over that a little bit by you know, bringing multiple characters together very quickly, you know, and for some of the, well, not just general audience, but even some of the comic book audience, it almost became slightly confused and bloated and laborious, in the structure of, well, particularly like the theatrical version of Batman v Superman. Because they were trying to sort of almost cram too much in, and therefore you end up with a movie that's nearly 3 hours long, and there are scenes in it that are obviously setting things up for the next film. But I knew comic book fans that were even confused by some of Bruce Wayne's, dream within his dream of a premonition of the future, and the Flash, prodding him to wake up from it, and all this sort of stuff. So I think that's a lot of that is not necessarily the individual filmmaker as such, but I think it's also perhaps pressure from the big corporation, i.e. the studio, to get these things done so that they can have this lineup where they have 2 movies for the next 15 years, on the slate, as it were. So I think that happened a little bit here. At least that's my feeling on it.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say about that sort of nightmare sequence in Batman v Superman? I mean, it really has no effect on the overall story. I mean, I thought the bit where when the Flash sort of, has his cameo and he's like, it's all about Lois, protect Lois. And you thought, oh, okay, something's going to happen to Lois Lane that if she dies, Superman's going to turn evil. And none of that happens. And it's just like, what the what? Okay, so they're all right. Well, they're setting it up for another film, but how's that going to work if at the end, Superman dies? It's just.
I mean, that's actually now kind of used as the setup to get Superman back in the in Justice League, because he's saying that Lois Lane is the key. He's the key, and of course, she's the one she's the big gun, or whatever Bruce Wayne refers to it as, that they have to bring in Justice League to sort of the Superman resurrection situation. So I suppose it is kind of setting up what was to follow, but I know it confused shed loads of people, because I had lots of conversations about that whole sequence.
So my
and what it meant.
My thinking on the nightmare scene is they could have cut that based on what we got in Justice League. I don't think it was necessary. No. Really, though it looks great, but that's not necessarily what I want in my films. Every film should look great at this level. Yeah. I think also the thing that I would say about them rushing, that doesn't bother me at all. I think it's part of the business. They're obviously desperate to get a piece of that Marvel pie and eat into that audience kind of money that they can get a hold of. So that I appreciate that's how companies work. What does annoy me is things like David Ayer, rushing his Suicide Squad film, and he's getting it all ready, and then the studio come in and they completely recut it. And the film that we, ended up with, I think, was completely different to what was originally intended. As with Justice League, what I was watching on the screen was not what I'd paid the ticket price to go and see. I don't know if you guys know, but something like 60% of all the shots used in the trailers are not in the film.
Yeah.
Which is common nowadays.
Yeah. For 3 hours of Zack Snyder's Justice League movie, the studio took out an hour of that, and then, allegedly Joss shot as 20% extra, whatever it was. I think it's more like 50%. So the Joss Whedon Justice League we get using the Snyder principal photography, it's a total mess. It's tonally wrong. The characters, which fans who've liked it have said, oh, the characters are brilliant. Well, they may be closer to their comic book stuff at the moment, but I'm not, if I want the comic book stuff, I'll buy it. I've got my pull list of books that I'm reading right now, and I like them. I went and saw Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman and thoroughly enjoyed them. And I went and saw this, and the message from Warner Brothers to me is, these films aren't for you anymore. You've done your supporting the brand. Now we're at a stage where we're just appealing to everybody, which is obviously what every film should do anyway. But all that sort of in-depth kind of honouring of all the canon, that's out the window. And, you know, all the Superman development that we've been leading up to is, you know, Superman is a migrant and he's been badly treated on Earth, and, you know, people can't see that he's trying to help and do the right thing. All that's out the window. And instead we get this horrible, you know, version of the character that seems to have been sucked out of Donner's film and then, you know, amped up 100 times and pumped into this universe where he totally doesn't fit. So I hated Henry Cavill in the film. I thought it was awful.
That's really, wow.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I must admit, what kind of disgusts me is about the sort of the DC films as well, as the amount of money they're spending on these films, and they're an absolute mess. I mean, the budget for Justice League is estimated to be 300 million. That's bigger than some countries', you know, national gross. I mean, that is just a disgusting waste of money, and they won't make it back.
No, they won't make it back. I think the projection from Forbes is the film has to have a global finishing total of at least 700 million to not make a direct loss for the studio. And that isn't taking into account the fact of how much money they could have made if they've got it right. That's just, they need to make $700 million to pay for the film. And that includes things like the production budget, the marketing budget, and the reshoot budget, which is estimated at $125 million, I think.
Yeah, and just the cost of covering up Henry Cavill's moustache by CGI. I mean,
I thought it looked really bad. I don't think it was. If I'd not known, I probably wouldn't have known that it was a moustache removal. That's a strange thing to be, you know, speculating about. But the fact that he looked wrong, you know, there's definite uncanny valley, you know, strangeness happening. And I think, you know, Henry Cavill's a handsome guy. If they were that, you know, desperate to reshoot the Superman stuff, I think they refilmed almost every single scene he'd done. But if they were that desperate to reshoot it, give him the beard.
Yeah,
he's had it in the comics. He looks great in Mission Impossible 6. Just do it with the beard. Like, if they're so desperate to change the film that much, I think it would have been more cost effective, less strange looking, and it wouldn't have done such a disservice to a movie star than to, you know, paint over their face.
Yeah.
Oh, Henry Cavill, there you go. You see, Superman and a Mission Impossible movie. You know, wow, that's living the dream. Considering less than a decade ago, he was branded as the unluckiest man in Hollywood, as they kept saying. You know, because he'd obviously been up for all these, you know, key roles, was Batman, Bond, and all this sort of stuff, and hadn't got them. I thought, well, you know, he's doing all right now, isn't he? Yeah, I mean, I actually, you see, I think Henry Cavill I like him as Superman, actually, because, you know, I just think he sort of fits the role really well in terms of, I always thought, for me, the benchmarks for Superman were obviously Christopher Reeve, and also I liked Tom Welling in Smallville, and Henry Cavill seems to be this kind of blend of both of them. So I think in terms of the image of the character, he kind of fits it perfectly. But I think, you know, when the first Snyder film came out, the Man of Steel film, I'm kind of, you know, with Simon a little bit on this one, in so much as the first sort of 2/3 of the movie I thought was great, because much as I'm a big fan of the Donner Reeve Superman, you know, and that's what I grew up with, and that's what Superman sort of was to me, I realized that sort of everything that had taken place since then, they tried to sort of follow that model, and you know, in terms of the design, and obviously John Williams' wonderful theme and the portrayal of Clark and Superman, they sort of always followed that, whereas Man of Steel tried to do something different with that same story, but, you know, visualizing it very differently. And I thought it succeeded well in that. And I agree with your point, William, about not making Lois Lane an idiot in this, you know, making her know who Superman is and all of that sort of stuff. But I, with the same as Simon, had the problems with the sort of mass destruction and you know, the fighting at the end of the film. Whereas, you know, as Simon already said, in Superman 2, you know, Superman took it all the way to the Fortress of Solitude to take it away from putting people in danger. And obviously they kind of then made that, because that was highly criticized, the basis for Batman v Superman. You know, they made that destruction the thing that was Bruce Wayne's motivation for that conflict. And obviously, much like the Civil War thing, the argument in the real world, as it were. But yeah, it's kind of it's frustrating, because I have to admit the reviews. I tend not to listen to reviews, but I did hear Mark Commode's review for Justice League, and I usually really agree with Mark Commode. I mean, I respect what he says. Generally agree with him, but he gave it an absolutely scathing review, and I have to admit, my experience, this is why I'm quite surprised by what you said. I actually really enjoyed Justice League.
Good, so, I'm glad. Well, I think that's the best case scenario. That's everybody wants to go and like films, and I think when you do, that's the best outcome. I'm sad that I didn't like it. I'm really gutted. I was so excited and so invested in this. If you think back about over the last year, less than a year ago, the sort of approach was originally going to be Ben Affleck writing and directing and starring in his own Batman movie. They had this other filmmaker, I'm going to try and get his name right, Rick Fuyama, who's a guy who did like The Woods and Dope, which is an awesome film, really, really good. He was originally meant to be doing the Flash film, which would have this element with Cyborg in it, and they were going to be investigating, you know, real world racial rights stuff, and the studio took a step back from that. Snyder's original plan, which the studio was supporting, was for a 2-part Justice League with a huge cliffhanger right at the end of part 1. And all that's been, you know, sidelined for the most kind of bog standard, one-note, audience-pleasing drivel that they can possibly, you know, ensure is as safe as they can get. And I just think dialing back all this kind of idea of, you know, what Justice League was originally meant to be, and just going with this, like things like Aquaman, the Jason Momoa character. I thought he was brilliant, inspired casting. I love the look. It's a departure from the current comics. That's fine. I think he'll end up, or the plan would have been to have had him end up like that. But instead of having this weighty kind of like growly warrior outsider thing going on, they cut all his backstory and they make him just say, "My man," all the time. I just hated it. He's a sort of surfer dude bro douchebag. And that's not what I'm wanting to see in the Aquaman film. But then if that's what's been presented in this and people like it and they go and see Aquaman, are they going to hate this, you know, serious heavyweight gravity that there seemed to be left over from the sort of Snyder area in that film? I don't know. I think definitely Warner Brothers should be concerned about how they're presenting their stuff, because it's not consistent. And I think when you're going into a franchise, it's one of the things that's been done well by Disney is the consistency is there, and it all seems to more or less fit together and add up.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, what keeps happening is that every time a film comes out and it has you know, a bad critical response in these films, they react. So originally there was going to be Man of Steel 2, but because people's reactions to Man of Steel, especially the destruction of Metropolis, they then felt, well, we need to bring Batman in, because everybody knows Batman, so we'll get Batman in and we'll do Superman v Batman, because everybody knows Batman. And, you know, that will fit our gritty tone. And then when Batman v Superman is again not greeted very well, they go, you know, because Justice League was shooting when Batman v Superman came out. They then went, oh, we got to fix this because it's such a mess and it's such a problem, and that's when they got their paws in, because as much as we talked about the bad of DCU, there is one good film there that I enjoy, which is Wonder Woman. I didn't think it was amazing, but it was great. It was its own self-contained story, and it wasn't setting anything up. It was well told storytelling, you know, within that universe. And it was like, so they can do Wonder Woman, but why is it they're dropping the ball when it comes to the other films?
Yeah, strange question. I liked Wonder Woman a lot. I think it might have been one of these films where the studio and the director were on board with the vision. I don't know. I just feel like there was this opportunity. Warner Brothers has been held up as being a filmmaker-driven studio. They're very focused on making sure their directors and their producers are able to tell the stories they want to tell. And I have to pin my colours to the mast and say Warner Brothers is consistently, throughout my life, it seems to have made films that I really, really love. I really like, you know, the way that the studio operates, which is, you know, a bit dismaying to see them screw this up so badly.
Yeah, I think it's because it's such a big thing, because there's so much riding on it, that they feel they have to step in and they have to change things as they see it, because it's literally like, so I don't know, I'm trying to think of another film we could use as an example. Well, a good example is Blade Runner. The fact that test audiences were so, you know, split down the middle of the film, especially the original cut, that they filmed a happy ending where they're driving through fields of green and using footage from The Shining. And, you know, just to try and salvage that film. But that wasn't Warner Brothers. That actual decision came from Ridley Scott, seeing the reaction. Sometimes films are a bit ahead of their time and it takes a while for audiences to catch up. Some films need repeat viewings to get into and into enjoy. So a film like Batman v Superman, especially as you say, the director's cut is so much better. If they had maybe put that out first instead of going for this shorter version, maybe they wouldn't have been so interfering when it came to Justice League.
Yeah, I mean, it's back to this sort of thing, you know, where I was saying about DC or Warner trying to play catch up or whatever.
Yeah.
It's sort of what I call a panic stations approach, because like you rightly said, you know, the Justice League was already in production when BVS got all of its sort of bad critical reviews and things of that nature. And it was like, you know, Zack Snyder, he obviously, you know, had some personal tragedy that went on during this as well, which is very sad. But it's like, well, who do they go to you know, to try and sort this out and fix this problem? Oh, well, you know, that Avengers Assemble movie that did really well, didn't it? That was okay. Well, let's get the guy who did that. So you end up getting Josh Whedon in, who is great, but obviously has a very, very different sensibility to what Zack Snyder has, and you know, whether you like it or not, you know, it is very different. And obviously, you know, there is some inconsistency, because I mean, even the scenes that were reshot, particularly if it was a mid-scene reshoot, even though the filmmakers and whatever did a really good job of continuity and trying to make it as seamless as possible, you know, I could still tell which those bits, simply because the hair, you could see the difference of the hairstyles slightly. Hair's a really weird thing
it looked like
for
a
continuity. It's really hard.
Yeah, it looked like a fan had come in and put in their own version of like, oh, this is how it's to be done.
Yeah,
And
those were quite glaring actually in the in the reshoots. I have to say, I could absolutely see where they had mid of a scene, put in some new lines or some new close-ups or whatever, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that was obviously the Whedon bit they stuck in there. So
I think the saddest thing
is
about
this whole
them,
panic stations approach.
I think the saddest thing about them, going for Joss Whedon, for me, is that instead of going for this MCU rip-off, which is the worst possible thing to happen to the genre, that's like not just damaging for Warner Brothers, but it's going to put everybody else in the back foot as well, because it lessens the quality of what should have been a massive movie that was really successful. The film is not doing well. I think what annoys me about them selecting Joss Whedon is that they have Ben Affleck, already making the film. He's part of the production. What better person to have stepped in Zack Snyder and Debbie Snyder, who's one of the producers, his wife. What better time to step in and support them and fully deliver their vision is somebody like Ben Affleck, who's an Academy Award-winning filmmaker. Why didn't they go to him and say, we'll support you, we'll help you finish this movie the way it was originally intended? But the studio didn't give much credence to Snyder's vision, and went and just took it in such a jarringly different direction. They simply just didn't have the elements required. Simon, you're saying it's an obscene amount of money. I mean, they made the film worse, and they spent $125 million to do it. Just don't understand that business decision. Forget the filmmaking completely for a while. I just think this 2-hour mandate that they put down, they did exactly to Whedon what they just done to Snyder, which was, can you finish our film? Oh, and by the way, right before it's coming out, make these changes. Just crazy, mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you remember what Joss Whedon was like after the end of Avengers 2, but he looked absolutely wrecked. He looked exhausted. And I think a lot of that exhaustion came from dealing with the studio, because they wanted to, put a lot of world building for other films in that story. And you can kind of tell. I mean, these, as I say, Thor going off to his mystical cave is a complete, left turn in the middle of a story that should just have been about dealing with Ultron. I have
to say, I didn't like that film. I loved the first Avengers.
The first Avengers is great.
A wonderful film.
Yeah.
But the second one was disappointing.
Yeah. And the problem with the second one was because, again, they were just going really quickly. I mean, the idea was that Ultron was supposed to be a protection for the Earth, a shield, and yet you don't really see anything of that. You just see him as a bad guy straight away. I'm bad, and I just want to do bad things. But I'm trying to protect the Earth as well, though.
Well, watching the trailer for Age of Ultron, I watched that trailer loads. Not afraid to put up my hand and say I'd totally geeked out over it. And the trailer presented Ultron as being a developed character. Now, even in a trailer, to be able to deliver that's quite impressive to me in such a short space of time. But you got the fact that he was nuanced, that he had a conscience, and was articulate. And he also, in the trailer originally, was presenting an alternative to the Avengers.
Yeah.
You want to protect the world, but you don't want it to change. All this stuff. And it was done with a serious tone. And then you get to the movie, and it's like Ultron's a stand-up. Like, he's just cracking all these jokes. Yeah. And that would have been fine if his actions had been a complete antithesis to that, and he'd been, a brutal killer. But I don't even feel like that quite materialised either. Fair enough, again, because it's a film that needs to appeal to children and so on. But to have had that really serious set of stakes there, I think would have been that was the film that I wanted to see. I wanted to see the Avengers make a mistake and have to rectify it. And I don't feel like that's really what I watched in Age of Ultron. I mean, kudos to Whedon. The film that I want to watch that he did was his version of Much Ado About Nothing, that he shot after he made Age of Ultron over the course of about a week with his friends in his house. That's the kind of film that I think that these films They need to try and find a way to emulate that, because that's a much more appealing film for me to go out and try and watch than, seeing a film like Age of Ultron. Why bring in somebody as talented as Joss Whedon if you're going to not put him to good use?
Exactly. And I think why Warner Brothers brought him in over Ben Affleck was because of, it's purely to do with the numbers. It's like, well, Josh Whedon's, Avenger films, brought in massive amounts of money, and this is a guy who clearly knows how to handle this kind of film, because in their eyes, Ben Affleck, he's still like an indie director. He does like the award-winning films like Argo and The Town, and I can't remember what the gangster film he did recently,
which wasn't a success.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, the fact that he at one point was going to be directing The Batman, and now it's another director. So
it's Matt Reeves now, isn't it?
Yeah, and there is talk that Ben Affleck is out as Batman, that they're going to replace him.
I think Ben Affleck should walk. I think it's not good for his image. I think it's not good for his career to be associated with this. He's a critically acclaimed actor, and these films are making him look really bad. He looks terrible in the reshoots for Justice League. And ironically, it takes him away from the thing that he wants to do, which is be a director. And I think if you want to be a director, you guys will know all about this. You have to go and make movies as a director. You can't do anything else. It just distracts you. It's already so much work to package and direct a film. I think Batfleck should leave now before they wreck his presentation of this character anymore.
Which is a shame, because I just want to say, because Ben Affleck is a massive Batman fan, and this is a part that he's always wanted to play, and that's why he sort of took it on and signed on for all these films and stuff.
Well, I love his version of the character. I think he's I love his version of the character. I thought it was brilliant.
I actually really, I really like Affleck's middle-aged Bruce Wayne. I really do. I like it a lot. I think it's one of the characters that really works in the film. I like the the older Bruce Wayne, the middle-aged Bruce Wayne that they've gone with this, where you have to imagine he's been fighting crime, as Batman in Gotham for 20-something years, but now he's here, and he's kind of in this film he's almost sort of taken on a mixture of the sort of Tony Stark, Nick Fury type role, in terms of he's trying to assemble this team. He has assembled this team now, but you see, I'm really sort of digging what Affleck is doing with this. I like it, so I find it quite interesting that you guys are not so keen on that. So
I did something that I don't normally do in the cinema, and that is made my displeasure at what I was seeing known by blowing a big raspberry when Batfleck said something's definitely bleeding. That to me is blasphemous, to make Batman that kind of foil for just rubbish jokes. I thought it was terrible. I hated the way that it'd been rewritten.
Yeah, also, could I just say, I mean, also the fact that he was quite willing to show everybody who he was.
Yeah, and talking to Alfred when he's in front of a criminal and stuff, that doesn't happen in the comic. I just think for every bit that I loved in Batman versus Superman, where he's screeching at Alfred, if there's a 1% chance Superman's our enemy, we have to destroy him. Repurpose Dick Cheney quotes. Something's definitely bleeding. It just makes me. I think after Justice League, I'm actually out of the DCEU as a film fan. Don't think I'm going to spend any more money on it. I might go and see Aquaman, but it'll be a case of reading the review first before I decide to buy a ticket. I can't begin to explain how disappointed I was with Justice League. Really, not much for me to enjoy there, I don't think. And I think what's really annoying is that I can see part of the original intention. I've followed the film for months, during its production, and reading all the little bits about it and so on. And I can see part of what the original intention would have been. I was reading online recently that the film was set in 2016, and it was going to be this kind of possible reaction to the Trump administration and him winning the election, and this idea that even in dark times, if the world's not what you want it to be, if you and your friends band together and support each other, you can still succeed. And I just didn't get that at all from the film. I got, if you're a film company and you're not certain about your product, you can't spend more money to make it better. You just release what you've got rather than trying to make up something else.
Sorry, they definitely sort of up the levity in this film a lot compared to the previous installments, and it seemed to me that like very much the Barry Allen character in this was massive comic relief for the film. In fact, he kind of does what in the TV show Cisco is kind of more the comic relief, and Barry is more the sort of straight guy. Whereas in this sort of retelling of it, they've kind of made him the comic relief in this. But also the other problem is I felt like I was watching a lot of things that were already very familiar to me. And what I mean by that is I'm about a season behind on the CW stuff, the Arrowverse stuff. But the whole Flash thing where he goes to visit his dad in prison and says, about how he wants to, clear his name of killing murdering his mother and all this sort of thing. We've had all of that over like 2 seasons of the TV show. So when that came on screen, it was just like, oh, well, I've seen that. That's already happened, which is another weird thing with them sort of making these 2 separate universes rather than taking a sort of Marvel route and having it all sort of connected. So I did feel that I was watching some stuff that I'd already seen, albeit on a smaller screen. I don't know whether that bothered any of you guys. It just seemed a bit jarring to me, just because it just felt so familiar.
I must admit, I'm not. I don't watch the CW stuff, so I'm not really that aware of it.
Yeah. I've quit watching the CW stuff. Just don't have the time to watch 5 hours of TV each week, unfortunately.
Yeah, tell me.
It didn't bother me. I think with these characters, because they have very clearly set origins, I think you deviate from that at your peril as a filmmaker, and you have to really be doing something quite different, or be doing a different version of the character to deviate from it. I don't know. I think it raises the stakes for a certain amount of the Flash for his kind of character, but what we were presented with in the film, I think that was a leftover Snyder scene, and really the film has become something else since then. So it didn't really do anything for me other than just being a bit that was left over from a previous version of the movie. I didn't particularly like any of the characters, I have to say. I think maybe that Ezra Miller's performance might have fared better in a version of the film where they didn't all crack jokes all the time. But I think in this version, he just seems like the sort of person you'd kick out your superhero team rather than have him in it, because he was so annoying.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, that was a complaint I had about the Ghostbusters film last year, where everybody was trying to be funny. There was no straight people,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this sort of trend to make everybody funny is just it doesn't work.
Well, and it stops anyone being funny. I think. You're gonna love this, Simon. I actually quite like the Ghostbusters film. I was so geared up. I had my knife sharpened, and I was so geared up to really hate it. I think the error on the part of Sony there, other than again they're absolutely departing with reality level of budget, was the fact that they made a Ghostbusters film. If they just made a movie about 4 paranormal investigators who were doing this, I think there would have been a lot less fan backlash. Because to me, it wasn't a Ghostbusters film, even though that's what it said it was. I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was amusing enough. 2.5 out of 5, maybe. But yeah, it wasn't as bad, I think, as people made out. Though I can understand on the back,
that's a whole nother podcast, guys.
Yeah, but I just want to say, I mean, the jokes fell flat in that, and as I said, everybody was trying to be funny. There was no straight people at all. I mean, when it comes down to the scene where they're getting fired from the university and the guy's flipping them the finger, it's just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah,
I mean, it's not Ghostbusters. It's just, what an absolute mess. It's such a shame that they dragged all the original members in for cameos. I mean, the Bill Murray stuff, you could just tell he was like, let's get through this so I can go.
So I can get my check. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it wasn't a case of just a check. It was, he was literally forced to do it. He didn't want to do it at all. I mean, they threatened lawyers and everything if he didn't do it.
It's bizarre. That really breaks my brain. I was going to say, I do love Hollywood film, and I do, I like getting my knickers in a twist over being upset about Justice League. I love being, appalled and angry about it. But at the same time, I think if I want to watch really interesting film, I now go and look for indie films and for the smaller films, because these are films that are made in a way where whoever's making them, they have a lot more control. Yeah, they maybe don't have a huge amount of resource, production budget and so on. But if you aren't beholden to having, that insane $1 billion sort of achievement, which I think is a sort of the Force Awakens current kind of trend, if you're making your movie and you're not putting in huge budgets, you then have much more creative expression and creative freedom to kind of tell a good story.
Yes, and also the word is being creative, because with boundaries, you have to think of ways to get round them, and I think that's partly what the problem with a lot of Hollywood blockbusters is at the moment, is that they have so much money that they can do whatever they want, and they will. Having been on the set of Transformers and seeing everything that was shot and everything that was used, you do get the feeling that the directors don't know what they want or don't have a vision and just shoot everything. Just literally shoot everything that they can, and then they throw it up on a wall and see what sticks. Because when I was on that film, the story was, and I hadn't read a script, but the story going around set was it was a time travel story, that these guys had gone back in time to prevent what was going to happen with this planet destroying creature, and it just didn't work out that way. It was just the prologue, and it was a very short prologue where all those battle scenes that we shot for days, running through the mud, running through the explosions, all the battles, all that kind of stuff, mounted to about maybe a couple of minutes on screen. And you really could tell that the director didn't have a fucking clue. I'm going to say that right now. Michael Bay did not have a fucking clue how to do... I mean, imagine it. You have a close-up on a main actor delivering a speech, which takes 10 times to do. And while he's doing it, everything else is going around. They are literally having us run through the mud, where it's literally a close-up on the guy delivering a line.
It's a strange decision.
It's a very strange decision. It's such a waste of everybody's time. It's a waste of money. And it's just, you are scratching your head going, I don't understand the decisions being made here. It just seems like I just want everything. Because, I mean, there would be about 10 cameras going every time. And it's like,
I think having a multiple camera setup on big films like that, I understand why it's done, but it does to a certain extent, I think, neuter the director's power to say, this is the shot. And when you get to the edit, you've then got, your 10 cameras footage. And that shot that the director wanted, that was convinced is going to open their scene, you've now got 3 other shots that are also brilliant, that look really good, but do they serve the story?
Yeah.
I
mean, I understand that, Michael Bay's style is to cut every second or two. I think the longest shot that you will hold is 3 or 4 seconds. And it's... So, yeah, you need a lot of footage to cover a scene like that. But when you have, doing something 10 times because the actor can't get his line properly, and through great sacrifice comes victory. I believe the line was,
"No sacrifice, no victory."
there you go. We knew the bloody line by the end of the 10 takes. And this poor guy, I don't know if it was nerves or whatever, but he kept blowing his line. But the thing is, it didn't need to be, the shot was, and I know this for a fact, I've seen the film, they didn't use any of the other shots that were going on. It was just a shot of the horse moving in with the guys behind him, and they're going, "But my lord, we must move, we must retreat. They're getting closer. They're going to, this is a dark day for us." And he's like, "No sacrifice, no victory." And you're like, that you just needed one camera on that. You didn't need the explosions. You didn't need us running through the mud. You didn't need the sword fighting going on, because it was just that shot. And it wasn't like we were in the background. We were in the opposite. We were behind the camera. All this stuff that was going on.
I'd like to bring up a thing said by Spielberg a little while ago and see what you guys think with your story there and reminding me of it. Spielberg said he thought a superhero film would be so big and so bloated it would collapse a studio, and that it would make the superhero bubble burst. Do you guys think that that's a possibility, or do you think that the genre is kind of going down in the tubes anyway?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, Justice League has made money. I mean, it's made silly money. I mean,
it's $400 million at the moment, I think.
Yeah, but not enough to cover the costs. I think we're going to get... I don't think this is the film that's going to bring down a studio, but there is going to be a film like this where people just go, nah, I want to see something else now, or I don't like this brand of superhero films because it's just, what's the point? Like yourself, you're saying, I'm not going to pay for a ticket to see the next one. And I think, there's going to be a film that comes along where they spend that ridiculous amount of money and hardly anybody goes to see it. And, the studio, because as we say, 300 million plus whatever else has been spent on this. There's been a lot more spent on it. You're thinking to yourself, why isn't the studio now, filing for bankruptcy?
Yeah.
But it's, we'll get a Heaven's Gate. A Heaven's Gate is going to come along, and it probably will be in the superhero genre, if not the blockbuster genre. It will be a mammoth, film spent, loads of money on, and it doesn't make hardly any of it back. But will it bring Hollywood down? Probably not. Hollywood has ride the storms, and they're still there. They're still making films. You might see a return to this kind of 70s style filmmaking where, back in the day it was the musical that they were making loads of, and then people stopped going to see it, and then they turned to the younger filmmakers, the indie filmmakers, and saying, well, we don't have any ideas. Your films seem to be doing well. What do you want to make? But the thing is, as soon as something comes along which they go, right, we know the formula to that, then that door closes. But the problem is that for that situation to happen again, I don't think it will, just because the studios are now massive corporations, and they have their offices everywhere, and they have all these things in place to say, well, we know what audiences want. We do surveys. We get, we see the trends. We look at what, other studios are doing, and we want to do that as well. So I don't think that situation in the 70s would ever happen again. I mean, maybe people will turn to watching more indie films. And I mean, as we've seen with a lot of the blockbusters recently, that they have turned to indie filmmakers to come on board and direct them. But then I think that's also a way of control, because look what happened to Rogue One. Mm-hmm. That was taken away from Gareth Edwards and, totally recut. And we don't know what his, You know, everybody wants to see his original cut of the film. I mean, we've seen a lot of it in trailers, but we'll never get to see it because Disney won't allow it, because they're very happy with the version that did went out, which, you know, as we know, contained a lot of reshoots by another director.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I watched Rogue One after not being particularly blown away by The Force Awakens. I thought it was, again, just a cynical, money-grabbing Disney box tick. Probably J.J. Abrams' worst film, his only miss, I would say. But I thought Rogue One was better. Yeah, it was all right. I liked it enough. But I think, again, it was one of those films where I just thought, what was the original intention? Why didn't it come out, you know, mangled by the studio? And again, like, one of the things that I think when studios get their, you know, board of execs and their test audiences in and they start chopping, it's the music that seems to suffer. And I just thought the music in Rogue One, it wasn't there as a Star Wars film for me. It didn't have that blasting John Williams kind of multiple theme orchestral score.
No.
But I don't know. I saw the trailer for the Last Jedi when I was watching Justice League, and it looks, in terms of its marketing, that looks the best out of the last three that they've done. So will I go and see it? Maybe if one of my friends takes me.
Well, that really is a whole nother podcast. And I love Rogue. I love Rogue One. And I'm not going to go into all that right now. But so back to let's talk a little bit about Zack Snyder then. All right. The reason being, I mean, obviously, with total respect to the personal tragedy he's gone through, which is awful. But you know, for a long time, maybe unfairly so, I was saying one of the problems with the DCEU is that they needed to sack Zack, right? Because, you know, Wonder Woman, as you've already said, being a great example, is okay that they went and gave us some backstory there. They did something that takes place out of the sort of time frame that we're in with these Justice League and Batman v Superman films, and went and gave us some backstory. Really, they were kind of doing with Wonder Woman what Marvel had done with Captain America. You know, only they were making it the First World War instead of the Second. Mm-hmm. And Patty Jenkins, you know, did an absolute fabulous job. I mean, I think Wonder Woman is a sterling film. You know, we all love Gal Gadot, and what's not to love about her? You know, she's wonderful, but you know, beyond her, the rest of that film was nicely put together. Awesome performance by Chris Pine, etc. as well. But Zack Snyder, you know, one of the things he's really good at, he is really good at sort of recreating these comic book panel type shots, and, you know, his photography and his look for all that stuff is really good. But many think that, you know, he's not so good at the character stuff. But I mean, if I remember right, our very long conversation we had in Glasgow was about Zack Snyder, and you know, if I remember right, you had quite strong feelings, William, that you really rate him as a filmmaker. Is that correct?
I'm a Zack Snyder fan. I like his stuff. I appreciate that he's a divisive filmmaker. I think that's a good thing. I think any art, personally, I tend to enjoy stuff more if it's really polarizing. I like things that are, you know, I really like it or I really hate it. The worst kind of output for me is, oh, it's okay, it's all right. So that's sort of not fun. I appreciate, because he is divisive, that people maybe wanted him gone from the DC stuff, and I'm not against that. I think that's fine. My issue really isn't Zack Snyder. It's the way that Warner Brothers sort of threw him under the bus on this. And I think, you know, I would have been happy to see a second Justice League directed by Joss Whedon, where he was fully in control of it. But just let Zack Snyder finish his trilogy. You've set up this, you know, version of Superman where it begins in Man of Steel. He's an immigrant to Earth. He's an alien. In Batman versus Superman, the whole world's against him. Batman wants to kill him because he doesn't understand him. And then, in part 3, he's just a delightful, happy, kind of almost on drugs level of euphoria. And it just didn't fit. So I wouldn't have been against Zack Snyder, coming off directing duties on these films. But I didn't like the way that he was treated as a director by the studio. I think it was rubbish. I'd also like to say he, I believe, wrote part of the script for Wonder Woman, and he and Debbie Snyder produced the film along with, I think, Charles Roven, who's one of the guys that's doing all the DCU stuff. So, as Warner Brothers are attempting to have Wonder Woman nominated for an Oscar, were it to win Best Picture, it would be Zack Snyder that's collecting the Oscar for that, I believe. Not to diminish any of Patty Jenkins' input. I think she's the sole reason the film is as good as it is. But I think that would be a nice little fuck you to any Snyder haters. Would be him getting Best Picture reception for Wonder Woman would be good. I don't know. I think he's probably made his.
What about you, Simon?
Last Warner Brothers comic book movie.
Well, I mean, I really enjoyed his remake of Dawn of the Dead. I mean, it was kind of a shame it was called Dawn of the Dead because of the similarities of it being in a shopping mall, but I think what they did with it was great. I remember I really enjoyed that. I wasn't a big fan of 300. It felt like the greatest hits of like war films. I mean, I hadn't read the comic book, so I believe it's true to that. But I wasn't a fan of it. I mean, I've gone back and I've seen it, a couple of times since seeing it in the cinema, and it's less grating on me, but I'm still not a big fan of it. I enjoyed Watchmen. I mean, it did take me a couple of viewings to sort of get into it. I did find the shifts in tone kind of a bit jarring at times, from it being really super serious to it being super silly. You're either going for super serious or you go for super silly. The super silly stuff just didn't work with the rest of it. But I enjoyed it. I think he overuses slow motion. I think his films would be a bit quicker if we didn't have so many slow motion music montages in his films. But I mean, that's his style, and that's the thing, that he does well. I mean, I thought the opening credits to Watchmen was amazing. I thought that just that summing up of the history in those opening credits was really well done. Was not a fan of oh god, what was the film with the girls?
I am in the middle of watching that. Sucker Punch.
Sucker Punch. Oh, Sucker Punch. Oh.
Had to go to my bed last night because it was getting too late.
Oh, right.
But yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of songs in that and lots of slow-mo and stuff. What I would say about that is I think he's interesting in that respect. He obviously loves that kind of style. And I think his films are so gratuitous and over the top. I really like that. I like watching them, and I think 300 is the perfect example. He just hammered absolutely everything into it. Get the contrast absolutely pumped, make it super colourful, get that huge orchestral score blaring, just get everything and cram it in. For me, that's one of the things that Hollywood does so well. So he's a perfect sort of Hollywood director in that respect. There's even a scene in Batman versus Superman where Batman hits Superman with a sink. I found that really hilarious. I love that. Just get him doing everything. But yeah, I'm only halfway through Sucker Punch, and the question that my friend and I and Tabby were asking each other last night is, does this mean anything? No. Is he either an auteur and a director telling a story, and he's got threads through all his films that mean something, or is he just a studio hack? I have to finish watching Sucker Punch to tell you the answer to that. I haven't watched the whole thing yet.
Yeah.
But certainly, I would say that I would consider him an auteur director, definitely, rather than simply just a hack. I think there's too much going on in his movies to just write him off.
I mean, it's he's no Brett Ratner. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, you can watch his films and they're enjoyable. I mean, if you like them or not, that's a different thing. That's what splits people. I mean, when it comes to Sucker Punch, I mean, it just, at the end of the day, it was just a lot of stuff in there that didn't amount to much. It's kind of, as you can understand, it's a bit of a forgettable film. It's the fact that I didn't could remember the bloody name of it. But I mean, visually, it's a feast for the eyes. But you know, story wise, there isn't much there. And I mean, I will say, I mean, the cosplayers love his films because they get to dress up in those kind of costumes. I mean, 300 and Sucker Punch. I mean, the amount of times you see people dressed up as characters from those films at conventions, it's like every time. So he has an effect that way. I mean, his aesthetic is very good. I mean, you're watching a Zack Snyder film, but unfortunately, the aesthetic and the storytelling don't quite match up in my book. I think he's kind of lacking sometimes the storytelling, and I mean that's quite clear in Batman v Superman. If he concentrated on just the one story, I think it would have been a lot better than trying to cram everything in. Maybe that was again, studio notes, what they wanted. I mean, the fact to waste Death of Superman at the end of a film was, especially when they were trying to, silence the critics of Man of Steel, the mass destruction, by using it as a plot point. The whole, Batman's purpose of hating Superman, but then to do exactly the same thing at the end, even though where they're fighting is kind of deserted. We get a helpful line from a military person going, "Thank God that island's deserted."
Yeah, I hated that. I wanted them to be saying stuff like the death toll is catastrophic and stuff. I mean, like these superheroes, people need to be in jeopardy in order for them to exist. So I have no problem at all.
I have to say, I think this is a problem with a lot of the Hollywood films lately when it comes to mass catastrophe, is that it's so much that you have no feeling of it. It's really you're kind of numb to it, because at the end of the day, you see like buildings falling down and all these sort of big explosions and stuff, but you never really see the people this is affecting. And I know to bring up Superman 2 again, but the thing about that scene when Zod and the other Kryptonians are attacking the people in the street, you see what's happening to them, and that is affecting. When you see big CGI towns being demolished, and you have no sense of scale, you have no idea of how people are actually dying. You might get a scene, one or two people that you saw early in the film running away from some rubble and stuff, but you never really get a real sense of people being in jeopardy. You just see this mass destruction, but it has no effect. A film that does mass destruction really well on a personal level is Akira. When Neo Tokyo explodes, you feel it.
I think it's a really good point, and I think a lot of, especially specific to the comic book movie genre, films make that mistake. I was one of the people who was kind of on the fence about X-Men Apocalypse. There's so much in that film I really like, and then there's other parts of it I just think fall completely flat. And one of the things that they just didn't have in the film, in my opinion, was stakes. It didn't matter what the outcome was. And we see cities being destroyed, but you don't see people. You don't see the citizens in those cities, running for their lives or, dying or any of that. There's nothing at stake.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that in comic book films you have to get right, because it's so integral to the comics themselves.
Well, I think any genre of film where it involves, we're talking blockbuster films. I remember Star Trek Into Darkness, where the Enterprise. Well, not. There's mass destruction at the end when one of the ships crashes into San Francisco, destroying all those buildings. No time to worry about the people who got killed. We got to have a chase between Khan and Spock. And then it's a couple of months later, and they're like, Kirk's doing the the Star Trek speech, and there's again no mention of the people, the hundreds of people who died in this, starship falling on them.
Yeah, now this is definitely becoming a bit of a blockbuster trope, unfortunately, and you do absolutely have that disconnect. I mean, I think what you said about Zack Snyder as a director, sums him up quite well, because I think that often things do get sort of lost plot wise with films. They're not necessarily strong on that sort of thing. However, he is good at making people, regardless of their gender, look absolutely fantastic on screen. I mean, some people have sort of said about some of the sort of sexist angles, but he makes the women look fantastic, but he also makes the guys look fantastic as well. So I would say he does that sort of evenly across the board, as it were. The whole thing with the CGI side of things, and they do definitely go over the top with the sort of destruction stuff. But in fact, that is one of the things that I think Justice League does actually handle a lot better, is the fact that in this, that they are, and that's I thought that was one of the real strong points of the film, is in this film they are actually about saving civilians, and they make a really big point about saving civilians rather than ignoring them like in the previous installments. So that's one of the things that I think this film does do well, to sort of defend Justice League a little bit for all of its problems. But the other thing is, I often feel that we, as the sort of generation of filmmakers that we are, we tend to rag on CGI quite a bit. And the thing is with CGI is, they are still wonderful artists who create all of that, and I have the utmost respect for it all, even though I don't understand how a lot of it's done. But I think the problem is nowadays is that there's almost CGI works best when you don't even notice it and you believe what you're seeing, whereas often, and one of my criticisms of this film, but I'd also say this about Thor Ragnarok as well, for example, is I just get bored in the fight scenes because they just end up being so bombastic and so, over the top that, it's the same sort of disconnect I had when the Star Wars prequels and they had the battle on Geonosis or whatever in Attack of the Clones, is it all looked, it was all so fantastical that I didn't actually believe what I was watching anymore. It got to the point where, it washed over me. And I got this with this film, and I get it with many, superhero action films. But without CGI, we wouldn't be able to make a lot of this superhero stuff work. So, you've got to embrace it as well. And, I just think sometimes they don't always get the balance right.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the Matrix films. I mean, partly one of the reasons why the sequels were so awful was the fact that they really relied on CGI. I mean, the fact that when we had all the Agent Smiths fighting Neo, I think that was the first time we actually saw CGI people fighting, and then suddenly it becomes a video game and you don't believe it, where in the first film where you saw the fight scenes, you totally believed them because they were real people fighting, and plus you had a connection to those characters. When they can do anything and it doesn't affect them, or there's so many of them, it just you just don't care. There is that disconnect. And so you see that a lot now. I mean, the thing about, a lot of superhero films, that they have this final battle scene where, the heroes take on an army, and you just see them taking on same, versions of the same character, You know, there's just bang, 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 bang. And after a while, there's just, you don't feel anything because you've just seen it a lot.
I think the point I would chip in with just in the end of your comments about this is that I think CGI can date your film really, really clearly.
Yes.
And good films, I think, you know, you're mentioning The Matrix, that's probably my favourite film. Something like that, or, you know, I would compare it to Jurassic Park as well in terms of its effects. These films, the CGI components are treated as visual effects. They're one part of selling, you know, your dinosaur or whatever it is, your hyperkinetic kung fu fight. And they become a small cog in the shot. There's all these different elements that are making this look real. When you get to the, you know, current slew of huge blockbusters where there's entire people are completely created out of, you know, 3D models and so on, that only looks real for a really short period of time. And then new, better special effects come out and it suddenly looks dated and your eye can see how unreal it looks. And I think that's bad. You don't want that as a filmmaker. You don't want people to be removed from the immersive experience. So I would say, like you guys, less CGI is a positive.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you've seen Green Room recently. It's a horror film. But that was, I think, brilliant because it was so focused on prosthetics and in-camera special effects rather
Fabulous
than CGI stuff.
Movie. I love that film.
Frightening, shocking film. I thought it was great. Hairs on my arms are going up thinking about it. But, you know, you don't get that with CGI very often. I think, ironically, Snyder's...
Yeah, no, I mean, that the visceral nature of what they do in something like Green Room is incredible. I mean, that film had me squirming in my chair. I thought it was amazing. And, there's something to be said about something that, even if it's not real, is done practically. Therefore, you know, your brain believes it's real, as opposed to that sort of uncanny disconnect that you get sometimes with CG. So, yeah, I agree with you totally there.
And I think, ironically, Snyder tends to be a filmmaker who's good at integrating CGI. I think he does things like, you know, his way that he composes his CGI shots when he's working with VFX and SFX to get that. And also things like his heavy grading that he does tends to make everything mesh more. And I think that's so rubbish on this film, Justice League, because at some points I laughed that the CGI was so poor. There's a particular shot of Superman flying. It just looks like somebody threw an Action Man up in the air and filmed it on a phone. You know, just that shouldn't be happening.
I like it. One thing I want to ask about with Justice League then and get your views on. With Justice League, they decided to take a different route with the music. And instead of employing the Hans Zimmer / Junkie XL scoring as they did in the previous films, they went back to Danny Elfman. And Danny Elfman actually included cues from his Batman themes, also some of Hans Zimmer's Man of Steel themes, and also John Williams' Superman theme in there. How did you feel about the music in Justice League, and do you feel that it was a step in the right direction or too much of a step backwards?
I feel very strongly about the music in Justice League, and I feel that it was a step backwards. I think, again, I would just say the message being sent to me as a fan of, you know, the previous stuff, the message being sent to me by Warner Brothers is, we don't need your support anymore. This film's not for you. I really hated the score. This was a film with its sort of CGI action spectacles that needed just like crashing, you know, heavy metal guitars or like a full blaring orchestral score for those bits. I mean, music is so key a component in film as a medium that this was totally lackluster. And I think it's no surprise that he came out the day after release and said, I didn't have very much time to do this. You know, what a sort of mirroring of the sad apology of a movie that we got was the sort of half kind of apology from Danny Elfman. I think, like Joss Whedon, who is the director for this, having his name attached to this will do him no favours at all. His Justice League theme, which I was listening to recently on YouTube, I think could have worked in a different film, one that had been much slower and maybe, I don't know, less kind of muddled. I don't think it's necessarily Danny Elfman's fault. He's just getting paid. That's fine. I appreciate that. But yeah, it didn't match his previous work like Batman or Spider-Man. He's definitely as capable a composer as Hans Zimmer. But I think to remove those themes from the film was just rubbish. It's actually the thing that I'm most irritated at, because I do like the Hans Zimmer music and listen to that quite a lot. So I don't have that enjoyment with Justice League, and I won't be buying the album.
Interesting. Simon?
Well, I've never been much of a fan of the sort of Man of Steel themes anyway. So, but then I'm. It's a weird time we're in when it comes to film scores, because there's not really that many great film scores. It does seem to be, and I know Danny Elfman has said this in an interview, that a lot of the times when they're presented with a film, they'll actually have temp music in there, and what they'll do is say, oh, well, just could you do the music like this? And hence why a lot of themes now, or scores, sound very similar, because they're going off these sort of temp scores. So I think at the end of the day, that's probably what happened. They probably, when he saw the film, they'd thrown on, some of his music from Batman, thrown some of the music from John Williams on there, and it was like, well, I'll just kind of do that then.
I think to have had, Hans Zimmer's apprentice, Junkie XL, involved in the film, and who would have been continuing the Hans Zimmer sort of themes. One of the reasons that I really like the music in the first two films is because he's doing this kind of old-fashioned style of composing where each of the main characters has a theme. There's a theme for the movie, and this all intertwines. That's totally missing in Justice League, and the score doesn't carry the film in any way. It just sort of exists there in the background, and you can hear that a little bit of the 89 Batman theme and a bit of the John Williams theme. It's like the studio's so embarrassed of those that it just put them in a wee bit and then took them out. If you're going to do it and have the full theme going. Again, with the Hans Zimmer moment when they turn up in the ship and you get that tiny little Hans Zimmer playing, that's the only time in the film where I sort of sat up a little bit and was kind of excited and thought, is this it? Is this going to be the film that I'm wanting to see? And it wasn't. So yeah, rubbish.
You get a bit of the Wonder Woman, although instead of the Junkie XL guitar thing, they reorchestrate. You get a little bit of that theme crop up as well, don't you?
It needed that electric cello blasting. I mean, like, Wonder Woman isn't, a nice sort of violin strings kind of theme. Wonder Woman's a warrior and a soldier and ready to chop off heads and kick some ass. That's what the electric cello's for. That's why her theme's rocking. Not because it's composed the way it's composed, but because it's composed for that instrument, I think. So I don't know, it goes to show, if you're producing a film and you start, altering somebody's creative decisions, you're altering the quality of the film. And you can sometimes do that for better, but more often than not, you do it for the detriment of the material.
What I've heard about this conversation, and this is why I kind of thought initially it would be interesting to get you on board to talk about some of this, is I honestly think, listening to you talk today, that a lot of my bias, if there is bias, is based on nostalgia. And what I mean by that is, me and Simon often talk really fondly. I grew up with the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. I mean, those, along with Star Wars and whatever, were my introduction into movies. Certainly my introduction into comics came from the screen first. I also grew up with reruns of the Linda Carter Wonder Woman series, and she was sort of what Christopher Reeve was to Superman. Linda Carter was to Wonder Woman for me, and the sort of connection with the comics. And it's funny because some of the things that I liked about Justice League were the things that served on that nostalgia, right? But I also take your point that they've kind of moved away from what Zack Snyder was trying to set up in his vision, making it very different to Christopher Nolan's Batman, and you know, sort of going in this opposite direction. So yes, I do sort of, much as I enjoyed Justice League, I do also totally take your point that the film itself is kind of a mess, because, you know, it's been cut down to be a more palatable length, and it does use two sort of different directors' visions to tell the story, and they've taken a step backwards with the scoring. And in terms of the consistency of that DCU world, that's the Snyderverse, if you want to call it that, you know, it has sort of moved away from. So I find that very intriguing, and I think, some of my bias may have been based on nostalgia, actually. Interesting.
So one of the things that happens in comic books, very briefly, is that your writer and artist probably rotate between once and twice a year. Maybe if it's something really successful like a Batman or Detective Comics or Action Comics run, you might have a writer be on it for like 2 years. But then it changes. And one of the things that I love about comics is you can read Batman for 10 years and hate, you know, some stuff that comes out and love other stuff. And it doesn't matter, because it's still different people's interpretations of the character. And whatever people's opinion on Zack Snyder is, my issue isn't really Zack Snyder. It's more the fact that the studio haven't let their director finish their story. So it's equivalent to a comic being cancelled for me. I'm never going to see the resolution to something that I was invested in. And that annoys me, because I don't think Snyder should have been on for the entire thing. I think he could have done his 3 films, or if they'd originally kept their Justice League as a 2-parter, his 4 films. And then I think the original plan, because Nolan handed the sort of reins after his Batman trilogy to Snyder, and he was on board for that transition, I think the plan would have been for Snyder to pass it off onto somebody else as well. And I would have expected Warner Brothers to allow that director, may have been Patty Jenkins, might have been somebody else, that they should have had full control and sort of reign over the creative aspects of it as well. And as a filmmaker myself, that is so attractive to the idea, to see a studio allowing creatives that kind of approach on an IP this big. And you kind of see that a bit with Warner Brothers giving J.K. Rowling the 5 films for Fantastic Beasts that she'll write and stuff, but it's just disappointing they couldn't achieve that with this.
Yeah. No. I think to wrap up, I wonder what you guys think, what they should do moving forward to maybe save this, or what you think they should do now to, you know, to help improve these films.
So for me to go and spend money on more of this, the thing that I would have to be offered by Warner Brothers as a customer would be a Zack Snyder authorized cut of the film. And I wouldn't mind too much whether or not that was even particularly finished or not. I know he did a work print and an assembly cut and so on. I don't think the studio are going to spend a lot more on this money-wise. I think will be bad for them. Any money that they spend on it is going to be money lost, I think. But if they presented a Zack Snyder cut rather than a Joss Whedon or a studio cut, I would buy it. But I would be reading reviews of what that contained prior to parting with any money. If they did that, I would go and see Aquaman and maybe be willing to go and see some more DCEU. But if it's just left as it is, I'm pretty much out, I think.
And you, Keith?
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm surprised by this podcast has gone, actually, because what I was
I kept it under wraps.
What I was expecting. No. What I was expecting was William to love all of it, and to hate all of it, and I was probably going to sit on the fence and play referee a little bit. But I do think it's surprising in a good way. it's certainly making me rethink a lot of it now. Hearing your comments about it. One of the things I do want to do is I want to go back and sort of revisit it a bit more, because I've only seen Justice League the once, and I haven't watched the other films much in a long time. So I kind of want to see that where they're going with it. I mean, obviously, much as Marvel do, these guys have got like a sort of plan moving forward for like the next decade or whatever. Now, the big question is that going to be a reactive plan, meaning, seeing what's going to happen with Marvel films, will that make DC try and sort of cookie cutter everything to sort of fit that, which I think would be a big mistake if they did try and do that. And then also back to both of your comments earlier about the oversaturation of comic book films, and is that going to kill the industry? I mean, is it going to be like the Western in the 50s, where it was just so oversaturated that it more or less disappeared, apart from one or two films a decade? The difference here is there's obviously a massive amount of money made with this stuff. And I don't know the answer to this, but I question your comments about will these films make their money back and stuff, because the thing is they kind of do. I mean, these films do extremely well in the sort of bigger merchandising aspect, and which is sometimes the problem, because sometimes, as we had back in the 90s with Batman and Robin, that film was essentially made just to sell toys, and it did practically kill the Batman franchise until Nolan rescued it nearly a decade later. So where are they going to go with this? I think that is a really interesting question, and all I hope is that they take risks with it and they don't just try and fit a mold that's having success with another studio. But who knows? They need to use. I like what you said earlier about the independent films being where the interesting cinema and storytelling and character development is right now, a bit like television is as well. And then we just have these sort of tentpole, big spectacle, blockbuster things, which I'm getting very tired of mass destruction shown on screen. The spectacle needs to move to something else, and I hope there are smart filmmakers out there. There are smart writers and whatever, and I hope and there's the wealth of comic book material to pull from nearly 80 years worth of stuff there, and I just hope people go back to the source and use the stuff that works and put a new spin on it, basically.
Well, my thoughts on it is that I think Warner Brothers needs to sort of take a step back and go, right, well, Wonder Woman worked, and these other ones kind of worked, not worked, they're a bit of a mess, I don't know. And just sort of, maybe just calm it down a bit, get some more, self-contained stories out there before they go back and do Justice League 2. I mean, yes, they're going down the Marvel route and they're gearing up for the big bag to turn up so that they can all join together and, fight it. But the thing is, Marvel's been building up to that. Marvel have, slowly, bit by bit, fed us, everything we need to know about what's going to happen in Infinity War. But DC is sort of rushing ahead, going, well, this makes money, and we need to make money. And they're making a lot of bad decisions, which, ultimately might, be their downfall. I mean,
I think, Simon, I agree with you. I think that we're going to see a lot more self-contained solo stuff I actually think Warner Brothers may not do Justice League 2 because this is so bad, and this film should have been the jewel in the crown of the studio's IP for this sort of line of their business, and it's doing nothing except damaging the brand.
I know, but we know Justice League 2 is going to happen.
I don't know.
I mean, unless they have a total regime change there, but their plan is to make another one, because at the end of the day, they're going to throw as much money at it because they know at the end of the day, people are still going to go and see it.
I don't know how long these actors are going to want to play these roles when they're not really getting the kind of, acclaim or recognition that they really should be for playing these kind of parts. The sorts of acclaim that Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, and Chris Evans are getting for their roles.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not the dead end that it used to be. I mean, think about it. If you were in a superhero film, it was kind of like the kiss of death for your career. I mean, the fact that Henry Cavill is off doing Mission Impossible, these other actors are off doing other films. It's not the dead end genre it used to be. So I don't think it's going to affect their careers that way.
Now, most actors nowadays, the lucky ones, they get to have several franchise films, plus they're able to go off and do their, independent films and, produce TV shows and all of that stuff, the lucky dogs. So that's all good. What I think's fascinating is, and I think you might be right, is that point about how DC could well do the opposite of what Marvel's done, and whereas Marvel have had all these sort of standalone setup movies moving into sort of the crossover stuff, that DC maybe they've done this and might step back to individual stories. My one worry with the MCU, with what Disney are doing with the Marvel universe, which I think they've so far done extremely well and have been incredibly entertaining, but I do worry that when they do have eventually this film where they all come together, whatever director or directors is going to be in charge of that have got quite a hard job on their hands, because having recently watched, this year we've had Guardians of the Galaxy and we've had Thor Ragnarok, which are very, very amusing films and really far out there, hence they don't really take place on Earth at all, right? And to mix that with something like Captain America Winter Soldier, which is earthbound and much more serious and darker in tone, and Civil War and all that stuff, how they're going to bring all of that together does slightly worry me in the future, because I just think, wow, that's gonna, it's almost got, the world's almost got too big for the world, if you know what I mean. And you think, how are they going to do this?
Well, hence why they're doing it as two films. It's the Russo brothers are doing it. I mean, it is filming
who
now.
Are great.
Yeah. If anything, they're currently filming it at this moment. I believe that they're filming both parts back to back because of getting all those actors together. But I think
huge scheduling problem, if nothing else.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, I think everybody more or less, when they signed on to do these Marvel films, they knew that, and they knew that was the plan and where it was going. So, they've been very much up for it. If from what I'm hearing about the actors that were in Justice League, a lot of them want out.
Yeah, so, I've heard that they really disliked the change in direction.
Right. Yeah,
it was not an easy thing to achieve, and quite often when they were shooting inserts, they weren't being told what they were filming. Yeah. Which is easy. Can you imagine being an actor and not having the information you need to create your performance? Really, not a positive filmmaking experience in my book.
Well, no sacrifice, no victory. I'm sure the actor did not have much direction, apart from somebody shouting at him through a microphone. Well, I think that's a good place to end it.
Yeah, it's another huge topic for sure, but we dug into a little corner of it, and yes, it's been a fascinating discussion. So,
well, thank you very much
guys
for having me on. I'm sorry I wasn't a lot more enthusiastic about the film. I was as surprised as anybody else when I wasn't delighted with it. But thank you for letting me voice my concerns and have my group therapy session. That was very helpful.
That's all right. we know how we know how these group therapy help. We had one earlier this year with Alien Covenant. Trust me.
Yes, that's my favourite episode that you guys did. I went and watched it after I listened to it. Great.
Now
that's why he didn't do Blade Runner. There you go.
Yeah. Or thank God he didn't do Blade Runner.
Wow, that's a whole nother one, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. Another one.
Yeah. So, William, where can people find you online?
I am on Twitter. I'm not very active on social media, I have to say, but you can get me on Twitter. I'm William McLaughlan. I'm at @WazMcLaugh. So you'll be able to find me on there. Let me know what you think. If you completely disagree, I'll be happy to engage. And if you agree, then we can cry into our Cocoa Pops together.
Not on social media. My God, you really aren't proper. You're not a proper millennial, are you?
Well, you're not on Twitter or Facebook either, Keith.
Well, but I'm an old git, so I'm the lost generation, Generation X. I'm allowed. No. Well, that may be improving in the new year, by the way. But yes. But for now, you can find my work on British Eyles. That's EYLES on YouTube. You can see short films that I've written, produced, and directed there, if you so care.
And as always, you can find my work on independentrunnings.com. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and all good podcast providers. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Movie Heaven, Movie Hell, and leave us a rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher. It all helps. So, comes down to thank William for joining us.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I had a really good time talking to you.
And
yes. I knew we'd talk a lot, William. I remember Glasgow.
Now you have to cut out half my conversation and find somebody else to give another different perspective on the other half.
No. Oh, I think it was good. I liked that you surprised us. It's all good. This is what this is all about. So that's
good.
Great.
Good. I'm glad. And if there's any Infinity War stuff that we can talk about, I'll definitely come and give you my opinions on that. I'll probably love it. That'll be a total about turn.
Well, I'll have you back for sure.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I really had a good time.
Yeah. And thank you to you, the listener, for joining us. And please join us for the next episode of Movie Heaven, Movie Hell.
Booyah!